The professor told me that my characters were middle class. They drove cars. They were not starving. Therefore, they were not the real Africa. He was an American who felt he could decide what the real Africa was.
Welcome to Candid Africa, Truthful and Unapologetic.
I came to the US to flee the study of medicine. And shortly after, shortly after I arrived, I realized that for many Americans, an African immigrant was a person who was fleeing catastrophe, war, or extreme poverty, someone who grew up with nothing or whose village had been burned down. I was baffled by how often Americans expected me to be able to talk about my experience with poverty, because they automatically assumed that to be African was to be poor. The story of catastrophe and poverty in Africa is very important, and it should be told. But it is not my story, and it is not the only story of Africa. Shortly after my first novel was published, an American professor told me that my novel was not authentically African. Now, I was perfectly willing to accept that there were a number of things wrong with the novel, but I had not quite imagined that it had failed at achieving something called African authenticity. In fact, I did not know what African authenticity was. The professor told me that my characters were middle class. They drove cars. They were not starving. Therefore, they were not the real Africa. He was an American who felt he could decide what the real Africa was. Because my book did not fit into his single story of Africa, he had decided that it was inauthentic. I wondered what he would say if somebody told him that the story of his life in a middle-class American suburb was not the real America, because it was not about food deserts in the inner city or malnourished children in Appalachia. We must seek the higher ground of equalizing the value of all stories, of not relegating the stories of any group to the shelf of niche or the shelf of special interest. There is a particular sense of validation and joy and pleasure that comes from reading stories that are about our own particular experiences, and nobody should ever be denied that. But it is as important that we read stories that are not about our own particular experiences. A student once asked me, "Will you always write about Nigeria, or will you write about more normal things?" And what struck me was that he had a sense of what was normal, and Nigeria was not part of this normal. This student was not evil. He meant well. But we can mean well and be wrong. Economic superiority is a fact of our existence, but it can also sometimes give birth to a certain kind of casual moral superiority. Some parts of the world have such cultural and economic power that they end up defining normal for everyone else. It is time to widen our ideas of what is normal. In my language, Igbo, the word for love is ifunanya, and its literal translation is to see. It is important to see those about whom we speak. It is important to remember that human beings all share a desire to be valued, a desire to matter. We want our bodies to be nourished. We also want our hearts to be nourished. We will be unable to understand people if we speak of them only in terms of their need. We must speak of their need because that's important, but also we must speak of what they love, what they resent, what wounds their pride, what they aspire to, what makes them laugh. We should read human stories to remind ourselves that we are not alone, to remind ourselves that we, in the wonderful words of the poet Pablo Neruda, belong to this great mass of humanity, not to the few, but to the many. And especially today that is politically fraught, we must seek the higher ground of multiple stories as a rebuke to despair. We cannot afford despair. We cannot afford hopelessness. We cannot afford cynicism. We cannot afford the defeat of our human spirit. We cannot lose sight of the enduring importance of compassion and kindness. Thank you.
there we have it. That has been our candid speech for today. Please feel free to give your opinions in the descriptions below. On this show, we don't tell you how to think or manipulate you. Everybody is open to air the opinion, what you think about the speech. Did you love it? Did you like it? Do you disagree with it? Do you agree with it? Please let us know in the comments below. That's important. Discussing these issues is very important. So with that said, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Share this video with friends and family. It's the best way for YouTube to spread this video further, okay? So it's been me, Mikey Mushi from Tunacheki. And always remember, Africa is watching.